talking to these people who were thankful to give their story. So when you actually look at what, when people are just claiming racism, that is a ridiculous low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I just want to add, in an hour, the Maryland Governor, Larry Hogan, is going to be in our program here. He has not done a television interview since this Baltimore blow-up occurred, so we'll get his feelings next hour. But I want to move on to last night, because I think the last two nights were very revealing. You can pick a side, you can pick a candidate, whatever you want. Here's how David Axelrod summed up Joe Biden's performance in round two.
But he was 60 feet tall. That's all they talk about. It's a long time before the presidential campaign comes, a year from November. They seem to be suggesting that the only one willing to fight with Trump is Elizabeth Warren. But Elizabeth Warren represents a politics, I think, that is going to take the Democrats back to 1972 and a wipeout of the sort that George McGovern suffered at the hands of Richard Nixon. She cannot possibly win with the extreme policy she is pushing.
Wow. Karl Rove had this to say in the Wall Street Journal. Democrats' big idea is may re-elect Donald Trump. From Medicare to all the Green New Deal, candidates work hard to repel swing voters. Talks about Biden's strong performance, to your point, Dan, and solid frontrunner status. It's clear that the party seismically shifted away from the centrist Democratic Party of the 1990s, making his path to the nomination far from certain.
I think Biden had a strong performance last night. I think that the other candidates on the stage actually treated Biden and Kamala Harris as the front runner. She took her fair amount of incoming. The first kind of 20 minutes on healthcare was actually a pile on her more than it was about Joe Biden. One point that I've seen making the rounds that I think is important is that Democrats need to take stock of how popular President Obama is. There was a lot of running away from him from people who had worked in the administration.
How did he fall out of favor so fast, Jessica?
No,
how'd that happen?
I think there's just a more elegant way to.
Help us here?
I don't think that he fell out of favor.
I mean, they are all Democrats. Well, I guess with the exception of Sanders, they are all Democrats, aren't they, Jenna?
Yeah, and so, you know, what I'm seeing here, too, is that the Democratic Party is having an identity crisis, and they are pivoting so far left just to be anti-Trump that they have to really take stock of what policies they're actually running on, because they are running away from a good economy. They are running away from low unemployment. They're running away from capitalism. They're saying, you know, let's give everything for free. I mean, John Stossel actually took stock of if you had the policies and implemented of what every Democrat was running, I mean, this would cost the American people. Let's recognize that the American government is not a revenue-generating institution. So this is coming out of your and my pocket. And so when the Democrats are all going so far, that's what radicalism is.
Doug Schoen is making this point at FoxNews.com.
And I have to correct myself because it's funny. I combined Karl Rove with Doug Schoen, and it's interesting because Doug Schoen's comments would have sounded like, oh, Rove.
Well, there might be an app for that, but we haven't built it yet.
The Obama's
what would that look like?
Obama's role here is very mysterious. I mean, I regard Barack Obama as most left-wing president of the post-war period. I mean, he really was a man of the left. His people, Tom Perez, his labor secretary, the current Democratic National Committee chairman, was a man of the left. And why the current edition of the Progressive Party and the Democrats thinks he wasn't left enough suggests to me, as I was saying earlier, that they are pushing that party so far to the left that they simply are not going to be able to run down the center in a general election against Donald Trump.
I think that's certainly an argument you could make about Elizabeth Warren if she were to capture the nomination. And I'm a tremendous fan of the campaign that she's running. I think that she is unabashedly authentic and believes in her policies, and she looks like she's having fun with it, which is something to be said in contrast to a Bernie Sanders that seems a little more lectury. But Joe Biden is the clear front runner here. He's up 15 to 20 points no matter what poll you look at. And he's running on a moderate platform that is building on the accomplishments of President Obama. He uses the word Obamacare. He talks about...
But he's not actually moderate. When he's saying, let's get rid of fossil fuels, let's, do
Jenna,
all of this, let's give, government-provided health care. When he's talking about all of these policies.
But
it's not Green No Deal. It's not Medicare for all.
Back to Rose's piece one more time, and then we're going to wrap this up, all right? Democrats' big ideas may re-elect Trump. He goes on to make the point, from Medicare for All to Green New Deal, candidates work hard to repel swing voters. They're the ones who are going to determine this thing. They're in Michigan. The president beat Hillary Clinton by that much in Michigan 3 years ago.
Yeah, and
does this turn people off in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Missouri.
And I think that President Trump and with his policies are resonating. I mean, people like us who are so steeped in the politics are looking at it and analyzing it and dissecting every little thing. What voters in Michigan and all of these states are recognizing, when you have the average American who wakes up every day with better taxes, with low unemployment, with the high economy, and when they're actually looking at what President Trump has done for America, they're excited. I mean, we see this at the rallies. We see this even at the polls, and I'm not a fan of the polls. You all know that. Speak out about the polls all the time. But if you look at every other metric here, President Trump is the clear front runner.
Another rally tonight, by the way. Did anybody else, I know you see Biden as the front runner, make a clear move in the past 2 nights for you, Jessica?
I think Elizabeth Warren did. I think that she'll continue her ascension. I think that Steve Bullock is a very good addition to this race. We'll see how it all shakes out, but I think he made himself a clear and important moderate voice on the first night. He's running, obviously, in a Trump state and knows how to get that done. But there are a lot more reasons for President Trump.
Thank you. Right on, Jessica. Jenna, Dan, nice to see you.
Cautionary tale for anyone that even conceives of committing a crime outside of the U.S. The Italian judicial system is so different than ours. There's no jury, so now it's just a judge making the decision. Already the judge is indicating that she's a little suspicious of the self-defense that they are claiming that took place, and that resulted in the stabbing of the police officer, because she said it's lack of self-control. So already she's suspicious of self-defense. That's their core defense. They're coming forward and saying, that police officer didn't identify himself. We thought that we were going to be robbery victims. We defended ourselves, and that's what resulted in the death of this officer.
Father of one of the teens speaking out, saying Gabriel's distraught with what happened and cannot come to terms with it. We're deeply upset at his predicament, while at the same time convinced of his innocence.
I mean, any parent would. And I'm sure they're just struggling with the fact that these children, forget the Miranda rights. There's no indication Miranda rights were ever given to these children. We don't know what they're facing in terms of what's going to happen once you have this process in place. You don't have a jury. If this one judge was already suspicious of the two.
This statement is more revealing to me. The same
attention that it's receiving.
Doesn't it sound very much like Amanda Knox? And that went for many, many, many years before ultimately she got to an appellate level and she was able to get released. It's happening the same way. You start to see the same patterns. You start to see the incredible media attention about these teens. And, of course, we're fixated on it because the differences between our criminal justice system, and there's lots of people that criticize our system, but you compare it to systems outside of the U.S., and you start to see, wow, maybe our system is really significantly better and affords rights that are not given.
Could be a case of self-defense. We'll see how that defense shapes up if they go that direction.
This math equation, Brett Larson is here.
16. I feel like I'm having a bad dream and we're having a math test, but I have my clothes on, so we are not having a bad dream. Okay, so you see it behind 8 divided by 2, but then in the brackets you got 2 plus 2. So the way Mrs. Landis taught me math in high school, you do what's in the brackets first. 2 plus 2 is 4. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 times 4 is 16, right?
That is absolutely the answer.
Absolutely the answer.
I was taught math. I will give Mr. Hauk from my middle school credit.
Little shout out.
I loved math. Bill Hemmer, how do you see it?
Mr. Nussbaum, 4th grade. He would have said 8 divided by 2 is 4. Parenthetically, 2 plus 2 is 4. Smitty would say you multiply them together, you get 16. Why do people come up with 1?
Well, the way there's apparently some other method of doing this I was reading about, which I've never heard of. And I'm sorry, math people, I'm a fan of math. But some people are saying that it's 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 plus 2 is 4, but then you're dividing 4 by 4. But that's not what you do.
Is this driving you crazy or no?
I think it's kind of, I mean, I took one look at it and was like, oh, wow, that's pretty easy. I wish this was on my SAT test. I would have done better. But there's apparently 2 ways of handling the parentheses, which I was also not aware of. But no, if you do, so here's the thing. I plugged it into an Excel spreadsheet, and I got an error message when I put it in like this. And Excel actually tells you have to put the multiplier between.
As long as you can show your work. As long as you can show your work.
I didn't cheat with the
FBI retrieved several memos, including a secret memo that Comey drafted the night before the agents arrived. Now we're learning the IG's office is going through them to see if any improperly contained classified information. Former Congressman Jason Chaffetz talked about that and explained it on America's Newsroom this way earlier.
I had a one-on-one conversation with him. We talked directly about that. He explained to me you cannot summarize classified information, put it in your own handwriting, and then hold on to it personally. That's why he was pursuing Hillary Clinton, but it appears that he did the very same thing himself.
Congressman Devin Nunes, ranking member of the House Intel Committee, weighs in a moment. But first, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts begins a new hour from the North Lawn there. And John, good morning.
Bill, good morning to you. This wasn't so much a search as it was a prearranged interview and handing over of evidence. This all according to documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act by Judicial Watch. Let's walk you through it here. The documents show that a month after he was fired on June 7, 2017, FBI agents went to former FBI Director James Comey's house to interview him and retrieve evidence, including memos that he had written on February 4th, March 30th, and April 11th, believed to be memos that he wrote to memorialize conversations he had with President Trump. Those memos were previously known and discussed at length in Comey's appearances before Congress. What is new here is a memo that Comey wrote the night before the FBI came to his home. Again, he knew they were coming. A memo dated last night at 6:30 p.m., which would have put the date that he wrote it as June the 6th. According to the documents obtained by Judicial Watch, the memo from February 4th was 2 pages long, March 30th, 2 pages, April 11th, 1 page, and then the memo from June 6th was 4 pages long. Comey also told FBI investigators that there were 2 other memos he had written about his meetings with the president, or conversations at least, that he could no longer find. Those memos were possibly about a phone conversation that Comey had with the president-elect sometime between January 7, 2017 and Inauguration Day, and possibly about a conversation he had with the president on the way to an FBI leadership conference in Leesburg on March the 7th. Comey described that call as all business, but is not certain whether he memorialized the conversation or not. The Department of Justice Inspector General is investigating whether Comey improperly shared classified information with a professor at Columbia University, which was then shared with the press. In the memo dated March 30th, the second page was labeled secret, no foreign, which means that no foreign access to that sort of information. According to the documents, though, Comey told FBI agents that page had been mislabeled and should have simply read unclassified for official use only. Some of that information may have involved the genesis of the Russia investigation and the use of the FISA court to begin surveillance of Trump campaign officials. Last night on Hannity, the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham addressed that. Listen here.
So if there was an abuse of the FISA process, if there was a misleading of the court by the FBI director, that is a monumental crime, and I would focus on that if that's what happened.
The Inspector General's report is due in September. The Department of Justice also has a separate ongoing investigation regarding the genesis of the Mueller investigation. So, Bill, we are going to have an awful lot to unpack after the August recess.
Wow. Thank you, John. Nice to see you today. John Roberts from the White House. Sandra.
For more on all this, let's bring in California Congressman Devin Nunes, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, good morning to you. So how big of a deal is this?
Well, this revelation of a new memo is something that I haven't heard of yet. The way that I look at this is that he gave some to one of his lawyers that was the professor, another one to former DOJ lawyer Fitzgerald, and now there's this other memo. And then, as John Roberts was saying, I had not heard about these other possible memos. So there's going to be a lot to look at, I think, over the coming months. The IG report is critical, but I would say most critical in all of this is going to be the U.S. Attorney out of Connecticut, Mr. Durham's investigation, because that comes with real FBI agents able to go out and talk to people that are no longer working at the Department of Justice or the FBI, and I think will constitute a real investigation.
Well, Jason Chaffetz joined us earlier, your former colleague, and he was really talking about the irony of these Comey revelations and just how important they are. Here's Jason Chaffetz.
There were code names and the real names of people that were informants for the FBI. You can't just take that information and put it into your own personal, have it personally. You just can't do that. And how ironic, because that was the allegation against Hillary Clinton, that there was classified information in a non-classified setting.
And now we know the Inspector General is going through them to see if they contained improperly any classified information.
Well, the whole idea that you can take something that is marked secret, no foreign, and then just decide on your own to take that out of a SCIF, so out of a controlled area, not handled properly, and take to someone's house or a university or wherever these memos went to. You just can't do that. And so what Hillary Clinton did is she had a server in her house with classified information on it. That's illegal. The same is true for a document. If you especially if you purposely take a document, it's one thing if you accidentally walked out with it, but to walk out with something that is clearly marked secret, no foreign, I don't see. I mean, there's been people who have been busted for way less than that. I will tell you for sure. I mean, you know, rank and file military intelligence people would never get away with what Mr. Comey so far is getting away with.
Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch was on with Sean Hannity last night talking about just what a big deal this is. And he makes the point that President Trump's rights were violated. Watch this.
This is a pretty big deal, and now we know for the first time the FBI was investigating his creation and handling of these memos, and it's a month after he's fired. They show up at his house, they're interviewing him, and he says, well, I have these memos. You want them? Come on, guys. The FBI let these records walk out the door, which is a violation of President Trump's rights.
He doesn't tell them that he's leaking them, he went on to say.
Right. And look, this is why the report, if the reports are true about having to send a spill team would only be sent and that to collect this classified information. I just want to reiterate this point. You cannot take classified documents out of any controlled space and put them somewhere and store them in an uncontrolled space. It's no different than the Hillary Clinton issue. So look, this is bigger than just these memos. Remember, those memos were leaked by Comey's own admission to spur a special counsel, the appointment of Bob Mueller. I mean, just that alone and of itself ought to, get Americans to sit back and think, well, wait a second here. You have a guy who's writing his own memos that are classified and then taking them places and leaking them on purpose to get a special counsel. And that's why this has been such a travesty and why, you saw last week with Mr. Mueller's performance, it was such a joke. And that's why there has to be a real investigation on what actually happened and how what are the origins of not only the Russia investigation, but how on earth we're able to get a FISA warrant.
So put this all in perspective for us as we finish up here, Congressman. Where ultimately think that this leads us? Where does this go? What happens next with all this?
So Durham is the key. If we can get Durham. If Durham it can get all of the information and then begin to conduct interviews. I understand that he's beginning to do that. And then the key, I think, to watch will be, does he convene a grand jury? If he convenes a grand jury, I think then this will get much more serious, and then we'll be able to see if anybody is actually held accountable. I think at a minimum, what the American people can expect is we will finally understand what spurred this entire investigation going back all the way to 2016. There's still all these unanswered questions about who were these cast of foreign characters that were interacting with the Trump campaign. There's so much more to be learned about that.
We'll see. Congressman Devin Nunes, thank you.
Thank you.
From Baltimore now, the U.S. Attorney there, Rob Hur, holding a news conference announcing the results of ongoing efforts to, quote, reduce violent crime in Baltimore. There's some recent indictments and a few takedowns that he's announcing now. Just want to drop in here for a moment, given the attention that Baltimore's had this past week.
For a drug distribution conspiracy allegedly operating in the area of Frederick and Collins Streets in southwest Baltimore. Today is the first public announcement of this investigation's takedown as well. In addition to drug charges, the lead defendant, named Jabril Ali, faces numerous federal gun charges. During this investigation, law enforcement seized 5 guns and 400 grams of fentanyl. If convicted, Mr. Ali faces a mandatory minimum of 10 years in federal prison and up to life in federal prison. His co-defendants face up to 20 or 40 years in federal prison. The third investigation resulted in 2 separate federal indictments, charging a total of 38 defendants for allegedly participating in 2 separate drug trafficking organizations to sell heroin, fentanyl, powder cocaine, and crack cocaine to drug users and resellers in and around the Edmondson Village neighborhood of southwest Baltimore. The second group of defendants, 16 of the 38, were charged several weeks ago on July 3rd. The defendants in this case used homes in and around Baltimore to process, cut, and package the drugs for sale. And these defendants, like the defendants in the other cases we're talking about today, possessed guns in furtherance of their drug dealing. Specifically, members of one of the drug trafficking organizations in this case distributed heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, and crack cocaine in Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And these defendants allegedly cut the heroin and crack that they sold with other substances like fentanyl. And at least 5 overdose deaths are attributed to the distribution of drugs by members of this conspiracy. Members of the other drug trafficking.
It is just stunning to hear the amount of information he's given up about drugs in that area there. We're going to watch this news conference, keep a very close eye on it, battling crime in Baltimore. This, of course, given all the back and forth between the president and Congressman Elijah Cummings. Maryland Republican Governor Larry Hogan has not done a TV interview yet. His first one happens right here in about 20 minutes. Since the feud began, Governor Hogan will weigh in for the first time on TV. His take on that fight is coming up.
It's so important that we stop this madness. We have some threats, but it's not China.
It's Laden. It didn't impact the organization operationally either. And that's the reality that we're dealing with here. We have to remind our viewers that while these leaders gain a lot of prominence, this movement has always been about its ideas. It is an ideology, and people are attracted to the movement because of the ideology, and therefore it lives beyond the death of their leaders.
So is it fair to say that his death would have little or no impact on the future of this terror group?
I think it does impact the recruiting, because if he proved himself operationally in terms of his leadership capability, that's still an unknown. I think they were looking to him as one of the future faces of the organization, because the current leadership obviously is quite elderly by comparison to where they want to be 20 years from now. So, yeah, that's where there is some impact.
Lastly, we haven't gotten a response yet from the president himself to his death. He was asked about the reports of Osama bin Laden's son's death, but he said he didn't want to comment, and I don't want to comment on that. Thank you very much. The State Department, we know, in February offered a $1 million reward for information leading to bin Laden's son, but again, we have not heard yet from the Trump administration on this yet. Do you expect we will?
I think we may hear some more information on it when they decide how to protect their sources and methods. On the al-Qaeda social network, there is some reporting that he is dead. But normally this organization, when any one of its leaders is killed, obviously even by their enemies, they always report it themselves, as they did with the death of Osama bin Laden. And then they celebrate the martyrdom that represents. And they use that for the movement to move on in terms of that person's sacrifice. That has not happened. So we'll wait and see.
All right, on the Afghanistan troop withdrawal, initially it was by fall of 2020. Now Mike Pompeo saying there is no deadline, but he says that the president is still committed to getting troops out of Afghanistan as soon as possible. Here's Mike Pompeo. The president's been very direct about his expectations that we will reduce our operational footprint on the ground in Afghanistan just as quickly as we can get there. I hope they're out not only before the next election, but before we land today, said Mike Pompeo. So he says they got it wrong. I mean, where do you see this troop withdrawal happening, or when, based on what you're hearing?
I think it's sort of an open secret that the president wants the troops out of Afghanistan before the election. And that has created momentum towards a peace negotiation. So we've got a team put together led by the State Department's personal envoy, Zal Khalilzad, who's negotiating with the Taliban to withdraw our troops based on the condition that the Taliban would ensure and provide a guarantee to the United States that an al-Qaeda safe haven or an ISIS safe haven would not occur in Afghanistan, as it did with the al-Qaeda that caused the death of so many Americans. Most of us who have a working familiarity with Afghanistan and been there many times and know the players are usually skeptical of a promise made by the Taliban to do something like that, because there's no reason to trust them, certainly. And we also have some concerns that when you put in motion an energy about getting out, we got to get out, we got to get out, the momentum that creates leads you to maybe a deal about withdrawal as opposed to a deal about a permanent peace.
All right, General Jack Keane, always good to catch up with you. Thank you.
Good talking to you, Sandra.
Thank you, General. The impeachment now push against the president coming up in last night's debate from Detroit.
I think it's obvious at this point in our history that the president has committed the crimes worthy of impeachment. The best impeachment is beating him in the election of 2020.
So then other Democrats calling for the proceedings against the president, how the party leadership is reacting on that. Plus the UN Security Council set to meet of the latest provocative move from North Korea. The Trump team pushing for restarting the nuclear talks with the Chairman Kim regime.
That's a promise that Kim... These rockets, as well as U.S. military bases there. Now, words do matter. Wednesday's launches were initially said to be similar to tests last week of short-range ballistic missiles, which North Korea launched. North Korea is banned by the UN Security Council to test ballistic missiles. North Korea has promised to the U.S. it would not test long-range ballistic missiles. So, if you're going to believe Pyongyang, while offensive, their activities this week do not run exactly counter to the spirit of the ongoing dialogue between President Trump and Chairman Kim, last seen together at DMZ end of June. Still, the promise of a restart of real specific denuclearization talks still not in sight at a security conference in Bangkok, Thailand today. Here is what Secretary of State Pompeo had to say about that.
We stand ready to continue our diplomatic conversation with the North Koreans. I regret that it looks like I'm not going to have an opportunity to do that while I'm here in Bangkok, but we're ready to go.
In fact, Bill, the Secretary's North Korean counterpart, the foreign minister from Pyongyang, did not show up at this conference. No word on when Special Envoy Stephen Biegun would meet with his counterpart from North Korea. As you note, however, there will be discussions today at the UN Security Council.
Thank you, Greg. Greg Palcott live in London on that. Thank you.
Fox News alert now on the continuing feud between President Trump and Congressman Elijah Cummings. Just moments from now, the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, will be joining us live in studio. He'll weigh in on the controversy
between President Trump and Congressman Elijah Cummings from the Baltimore district. With me now for his first national television interview since the fight began, Maryland Governor, the Republican Larry Hogan. Governor, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Bill.
Is your health good?
I'm doing great, thanks.
I know, well, you look good. You and I first met 4 years ago during the Baltimore riots of 2015.
I remember.
And listening to that attorney just a few minutes ago, the list of drugs that he laid out for us was stunning.
Staggering.
Why does it continue, Governor?
Well, this is a problem that's facing, urban areas all across America, and it's mostly fueled by, the opioid and fentanyl crisis. But look, I want to congratulate U.S. Attorney Herr on the announcement that he just made. This is a small part of a larger effort, and I want to give credit to the administration working together with us. We brought together 26 federal and state law enforcement agencies and sent in 500 additional police officers into Baltimore City to back up the beleaguered city police force. We made 2,000 arrests, including taking 260 of the most violent repeat offenders off the streets of Baltimore. But it's just a start. I mean, we've got serious problems in Baltimore City.
To that problem, the blow-up over the past week, and I know you took exception to the president's words. Has he, even though you disagree with the way he put it out there, has he helped to bring attention to the problems in Baltimore?
Look, I think that could be the silver lining. I took exception with, I didn't think, the kind of angry attacks on Twitter were appropriate. I just happen to believe that we ought to be focusing on the problems and the solutions, which is what we're doing today with the U.S. Attorney and the administration. So I think it's good that we're paying attention to the problems in Baltimore. And I'd like everybody from the president and the administration and the Congress to work with us at the state level and with the folks in Baltimore City to see about what we can do to work together, continue to work together.
You're the head
clean up the
politician
problem.
in that state. Yesterday, Robert Ehrlich, who's the former governor, was with us, and he really had a call out for a lack of leadership. This is what he said on that. Watch here.
They passed a bill in the legislature. They beat us. They were satisfied with their dysfunctional public schools. They even had a press conference to brag about beating the Republican governor. We told him he's not going to come in here and help these schools. We're going to protect our dysfunctional schools. We're going to protect dysfunctional students.
When you hear his passion there, you have to ask yourself, who's looking out for these people?
Well, I know I am, and I think Bob Ehrlich was when he was governor. I can tell you I agree with a lot of that sentiment. Look, I have put about $5 billion into the city of Baltimore. We've invested more in the schools. We've put more into helping them do crime fighting. I have come in. The blight in Baltimore is a problem, as it is in urban areas across the country. We've torn down 4,000 blighted buildings. The state has come in to scrape them out of there because it has a lot to do with crime and cleaning up these neighborhoods. But I had tough legislation we put in the legislature for tougher sentences for repeat violent offenders to get them off the streets because we keep arresting them. The city police force and the feds and the state keep arresting these folks, but it's a revolving door of catch and release. They keep going right back on the streets. The legislature,
that's a policy that's got to change then.
But the legislature refused to even take the bill up. 2 years in a row, I've been pushing for tough sentences for repeat offenders, and they say no.
You're a Republican, as I pointed out a moment ago. Did you see Dan Henninger in the Wall Street Journal this morning?
I did not.
He wrote a piece characterizing these number of American towns that have been ruled by Democrats for more than 50 years. He concludes this. He says, Mr. Trump brought up the subject of Baltimore. Now he should put it in these other cities on his campaign agenda. The left scream racism. Everyone else in America knows the reality is deeper than that, end quote.
Well, look, I think the reality is deeper. We've failed in our urban areas across the country, and Baltimore certainly is a perfect example of that, and the leadership has failed for decades and decades. I mean, look, you don't have to do a whole lot of research to find out the corruption we've had in Baltimore City and the mayors repeatedly who have failed to get the job done and have been involved in corruption and not stopping the crime problem, failures in the school system. But instead of just focusing on the bad stuff and just attacking, let's figure out how do we figure out how to help them fix it.
Do you think Elijah Cummings has done a good job?
I don't want to characterize Elijah Cummings. I don't believe you can put all the blame of Baltimore City on Elijah Cummings, but I also think he could do a lot more to help us. I think everything we've been trying to do at the state level, I'd love to have more help from the White House and from the Congress, frankly, to help the state go in there and help the city. It's really a city problem, but they can't do it by themselves.
Let me just show you some of the murder rate per 100,000 people. Baltimore's at 55. That leads Detroit, Memphis, Chicago, and Philadelphia. On the financial situation, 2018, advance at once, guys. $16 billion given to the city of Baltimore by the federal government. It was $7 billion 10 years prior. Poverty level, 22%, compared to a national level at 12%. I mentioned Elijah Cummings. He's part of this conversation. This is the video that was tweeted yesterday from the West Wing, right here, from 1999.
About is the fact that this type of attack against Baltimore is saying, let's find the truth here. Let's look at what's going on in America and let's bring this to light. No one was talking about Baltimore until President Trump actually shined the light on it. And now everyone is talking about it. You have all of these reporters who are going in and actually seeing. I mean, Benny Arthur Johnson from TPUSA actually went in and was talking to these people who were thankful to give their story. And so when you actually look at when people are just claiming racism, that is a ridiculous low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I just want to add, in an hour, the Maryland Governor, Larry Hogan, is going to be in our program here. He has not done a television interview since this Baltimore blow-up occurred, so we'll get his feelings next hour. But I want to move on to last night, because I think the last two nights were very revealing. You can pick a side, you can pick a candidate, whatever you want. Here's how David Axelrod summed up Joe Biden's performance in round two.
But he was 60 feet tall. That's all they talk about. It's a long time before the presidential campaign comes, a year from November. They seem to be suggesting that the only one willing to fight with Trump is Elizabeth Warren. But Elizabeth Warren represents a politics, I think, that is going to take the Democrats back to 1972 and a wipeout of the sort that George McGovern suffered at the hands of Richard Nixon. She cannot possibly win with the extreme policy she is pushing.
Wow. Karl Rove had this to say in the Wall Street Journal. Democrats' big idea is may re-elect Donald Trump. From Medicare to all the Green New Deal, candidates work hard to repel swing voters. Talks about Biden's strong performance, to your point, Dan, and solid front-runner status. It's clear that the party seismically shifted away from the centrist Democratic Party of the 1990s, making his path to the nomination far from certain.
I think Biden had a strong performance last night. I think that the other candidates on the stage actually treated Biden and Kamala Harris as the front runner. She took her fair amount of incoming. The first kind of 20 minutes on healthcare was actually a pile on her more than it was about Joe Biden. One point that I've seen making the rounds that I think is important is that Democrats